Hey guys, Big P here. So after listening to Sobin's song for this long, I'm finally here with the most comprehensive guide you ever need for Robin Summeretto, which once again I'm just going to be calling her Sobin, and I feel she's going to be bringing a lot of changes to the meta and overall team building in Honkai style similar to Emblade's release. So we'll be going through her kit, right, her Lightcones, team building, Relics, Eidolons, and etc. So without further ado, let's go. So as a quick summary, Sobin's kit is actually really simple, but because she's gonna be a support, there are a ton of things you can actually try, which is why this guide is always extra detailed whenever a new support unit comes out in HSR. And speaking of which, we actually haven't gotten another Harmony since Ceredra, because I think Dance just simply way too broken, so I kind of just removed the entirety of Harmony for now. But that being said, to put it simply, Sobin isn't great because of her action advance as well as energy regeneration, otherwise Sunday will still be tier 0. Now, the real reason why Sobin is so good is because she's straight up a multiplier beast that brings so much buff percentage to the table that you can simply brute force your way through the content, especially with defense down stacking, which reminds me a little bit of the buffs that Emblade provided, giving his defense down, vulnerability, as well as personal damage. So if Emblade is gonna be a generalist support that can be seen in almost every single HSR team in the current top endgame content, then Sobin is not that much different, although she brings a different way of buffing to the table, and yes, both of them can work extremely nicely with one another due to hit count synergy as well as defense down stacking. So if you're someone that's lacking in universal support, especially if you skipped Emblade, then Sobin's value can be extremely high for both new and old players alike. Now, this is a little bit unrelated, but I also feel this is the best time to start Honkai Star if you're going to be a new player, getting either E2 Nimiko if you want to commit for her, or just save all the pools and commit to an E2 Sobin for, in my opinion, the best generalist support of HSR, very much similar to E1 Tribi back then, but even stronger at E2. Now, move on to the Creator kit in casual terms. This is one of the easiest units to actually use in the support category, and that is going to be use your skill for summoning a bird, and at 12 vibes you'll start singing, and then you'll cast your ultimate on an ally for 100% advance as well as a bit of energy regeneration. And in order to get more vibes, you basically want to attack, heal, or shield over time, which will eventually hit all the way up to 50 vibes at E0, E2 for 70. For the base attack, you can completely ignore them, and then for a skill, you will only cast this skill once to summon one bird. So this bird will have then more birds when the vibes are up from the talent, and at 12 vibes, it will be all 3 birds at the same time. You will only use this skill once at the start of battle, so Sobin herself should never ever need you to put in another action again. So the only thing you need to press for Sobin is basically her ultimate, because realistically, you should never exit this singing state for the rest of the game. Now for Sobin's ultimate, think of this as like a Sunday pool plus his ultimate combined into one, where the special guest as well as the summons give Sobin more vibes, so you ideally use it on units that hits more frequently, or it's gonna be an energy main DPS like Nimiko or Saber or Gilgamesh, who can benefit from the 20% energy. Now this ultimate itself doesn't actually have any damage buffs, so you can use this for a sub DPS as well if they hit frequently enough should your main DPS not use energy. So units like Evernight as well as Emblade can also take the effect of this ultimate. Now one thing to keep in mind for this ult is that the other allies cannot advance the actions of friendly targets as long as they have special guests. So if you are going to be using them with units like Tribi with DDD or Cyrene, they will prevent them from providing action value. So things like E6 Cyrene or anyone you're running Dance will not be benefiting from this buff as well, so do not give them that. Then move on to the talent. Vibes are gonna be the number you see below her portrait. You do not want to confuse it with the energy icon that says 11 or 12, and that is gonna be for the additional energy after heals traced. So once Sobin starts singing for the first 12 vibes, you will pretty much never stop singing for the rest of the battle if you're going to be using her with the right teammates, which has a lot of different options. So she will now then become this music icon, so her actual portrait is not going to be the battle icon anymore, and every single time it reaches these music icon, she will lose 50% of the current vibes. So at 50 vibes, you're going to be going back to 25, at 40 vibes, it's going to be 20, etc, etc. And at 50 vibes E0, this is going to be providing us a 40% defense down, but you realistically will not have this at 100% uptime, so a closer number will be roughly 40 vibes on average for most teams, hence roughly 35% defense down, though you can try and time your ultimate attacks until the vibes are close to 50. You also have this adaptable attack or crit damage buff that scales with vibes for the attack portion, so always try to time your big hits when the vibes are close to 50. For Sobin's bursts specifically, they take on 180% of the total speed, hence you should always try to run speed boost generally speaking to get a pseudo 281 speed, which guarantees you 4 actions in 150 AV or 8 actions in 300 AV. And this can be relatively easily achieved with your Herta S5. Now the reason why I kinda like running this 281 speed is due to the countdown of Fever having a fixed 140 speed. So ideally, your burst will outlap this countdown twice, which is roughly 156 Sobin speed, just to get more vibes and damage right before the cycle reset. If you care about the math, you can kinda see it over here, but generally it's not gonna be that important, but I do like to squeeze out a little bit more damage for the burst before the minus 50% vibes. Then move on to the Mimo Sprite skills. She does summon a lot of different birds. For the birds themselves, it's gonna be decent damage, but it's nothing too crazy unless you record E1 plus for Sobin. And then for the talents, TLDR, you'll have a pretty much permanent 16% damage taken because all 3 birds should be active at all times, and the birds will also deal damage at scale with vibes, which also scales up with your E1 and E2 for more true damage and vibes respectively. And our first 20 energy will be for faster first out activation. And then for the technique, you will always want to use this for a mini Von Whack, and if you combine this with an S1, it's going to be 50% advance, which should always guarantee the first turn so that Sobin can summon her birds as fast as possible. Now move on to the major traits. The first trait is a permanent buff that's adaptable depending if you use Sobin with HP or attack scaling DPS. This is maxed out at 36% of her HP for the attack or 115% crit damage, both at E0. But you generally won't hit this 100% of the time, so take this with a little bit of a lower value at this point. Now keep in mind, this attack percentage buff, it might look only 36%, but it is 36% of Sobin's max HP, which can be very significant due to Sobin's massive HP pool. Usually you're going to be able to hit buffs around 3000 with a signature or roughly 2.7 to 2.8k with a S5 Herta Store Lightcone. Keep in mind, this is an extremely high attack buff, so for example, a base 1000 attack unit with their Lightcone will be close to a 300% attack buff with relatively good uptime, allowing units like Nimiko to even run damage percentage sphere if you have really good substats. Just from the pure amount of attack you're getting from this, simply places Sobin as one of if not the best generalist attack buffer in the entire game. Now the battery is gonna be this little icon over here, which is up to 36 energy at 12 groove or 3 energy per groove, which is a little bit similar to the old version of Robin when your ally attacks, but this is gonna be tied to your healing and shielding, so it does help your ultimate uptime, but it is not gonna be useful in a sustainers run, which can still be decently viable. Then lastly, it's gonna be 50% crit rate, so you just wanna hit 50% in the stat screen for 100% crit in combat. Now for Sobin's minor traces, she does have a massive 14 speed, which will allow you to hit 120 speed with Herta S5, which is 145 speed boots, so you just get about 5 speed stars for more than 155 speed. S1 doesn't have speed on the screen, but it trades for 30% advance as well as later on a 20% speed buff, so it's still a very high amount of speed in combat itself. And then for the skill leveling priority, you want to focus on the ultimate and the Mimo Sprite stuff, followed by the skill and talent, followed by your basic attack. Now moving on to the signature Lightcone, if Von Whack was gonna be a Lightcone, then Sobin is pretty much gonna be it. This Lightcone is mainly for the utility of a 30% action, 1 skill point gain, and team-wide 20% speed buff, which is pretty much permanent because Sobin should never take a turn for herself once you enter into the singing state. Unfortunately, you can't really stack this with other Mimo Sprite units like for example Hyacinth because they will always be taking a turn. Now one thing to know is that because of this massive 30% max HP buff, your attack buff in combat is also going to be increased about roughly a 500-ish attack upgrade at roughly max stacks. So from an AV perspective, the 20% speed buff is also pretty substantial because it is literally 10 speed stars for the entire team. So trying this with Anomaly Night 1, we went from a 2 cycle 66 AV, so barely 1 cycle, to a 0 cycle with 2 AV on the clock. So about a 1 cycle upgrade for about 1 cost, which is very nice. I would say this is a very good Lightcone, but our Eidolons are far more important, and we do have Herta S5, which is gonna be an excellent replacement. Now moving on to the Relics, we can use Deliver 4-piece for personal damage and team-wide 15% damage buff, which is very good for most situations. You can consider running 4-piece Secretos for Finon specifically, as you force up to a 36% crit damage that stacks with other Secretos users. However, due to Sobin's ultimate being the only target buff, it is very hard to stack this fully because every single time you take a turn, you are going to be expiring them very fast. So generally, I'll be sticking with Deliverer, and PS, no, Eagle 4-piece does absolutely nothing for Sobin, very much like normal Robin, because realistically, you should never take a turn forever again. For the 2-piece, you have 3 main options being Enforius, Vonwek, as well as Luxaga. Vonwek is going to be my personal favorite since you really want to make sure she goes as fast as possible to get the birds in, and the energy regeneration is a nice touch. This is also one of the best sets to use, especially for anomaly arbitration, so you can take that into consideration. Enforius can also be good for situations if you're not going to be chasing action value, so you can get a team-wide 8% speed buff permanently, which is very nice when combined with S1 for a 28% speed buff. So if you're not chasing for things like Zero Cycles, Enforius is generally the better option because the speed is going to add up over time. You can also consider Luxaga if it has very nice substats. Then moving on to the build for Robin specifically, we are going to be going for HP body over crit damage, speed over HP for the feet, HP over wind for the planisphere, energy regeneration rope, as well as speed and crit substats. So for both teams on Evernight as well as Nemiko, assuming you are going to be running speed boost and ER rope, the difference is really small between all 4 options for the team-wide damage, with crit damage and HP sphere slightly ahead by 0.3% as well as 1% respectively. That being said, I do prefer HP percent purely just for the sustainers option with Sobin, as it scales very well if you can pull off without a sustain. And the HP percent greatly adds to the comfort for that as well. And on top of that, higher HP does give you a slightly higher attack buff, which can benefit your main DPS specifically with higher costs. So you can also consider HP boots for some situations just to get more durability and attack percentage buffs. Personally, I just like my bursts a little bit faster and for them to lose some weight because they're just way too fat. Now moving on to the Eidolons, very good E1, game-changing E2, and I would say the strongest E6 support in the entire game by an absolutely massive margin. So for the E1, true damage is always going to be a very good independent multiplier, and it works exactly like Cypher's Patron ultimate, but you can't decide when to let it go or hold it for the next wave, so it's a little bit similar to E1 Tribute as well in terms of smart targeting stacking. There's one bonus for this E1, which is the stored value is only cleared at 50% instead of all like Cypher. So it will be 16% plus, let's just say you cleared 50% of it, that's going to be 8%, followed by 4%, followed by 2% all the way until it's close to 32% true damage over time, assuming you hit 50 vibes at every single burp. But this tally always clears at 50% of the current value, so minimum you're going to be getting around 11 plus maybe 3 to 4% if you can't hit 50 vibes all the time. Generally, for the maximum value of this E1, it would take you about 3 burps to get the highest amount of true damage before going into the boss stage itself. This E1 is then slightly increased to 36% true damage and maximum for E2, which in my opinion is gonna be the game-changing Eidolon for Sobin. This will allow you to have double vibe generation with absolutely insane value, as well as crazy high amounts of raw damage monster combined with E1's true damage scaling on top of the 18% rest pen. I will showcase this more in a Sobin cost video coming up, but just know that because of this additional vibe generation with the highest limit up to 70 vibes instead of 50, the amount of numbers you're going to be getting from this E2 Sobin is really crazy. Then moving on to the E4 is just going to be more vibes for the first fever for the initial burst, as well as more burst speed. So it's going to be 200% up to 35% total for 235% on your current vibes. Then lastly, moving on to the E6, I just want to say for those of you guys who are going to be willing, Sobin's E6 is the strongest E6 support in the entire game. And I would say it's even stronger than E6 Cyrene by a considerable margin. You have double damage on your birds, 2 ultimate at a restart, and a free energy regeneration every fever countdown at a fixed 71 AV. Absolutely disgusting E6, so you're pretty much going to be having one of, if not the highest damage multiplier burst for every single team in existence in HSR. Also, speaking of whales, S5 Lightcone also gives you a 40 action advance instead of 30, so pairing this with Vonwek and as well as a technique, Sobin can actually start an action at 0 AV, very similar to E6 Cyrene back in those days, where you can stack onto your recollection stacks all the way up to 24 to cast an ultimate immediately. So with regards to cost maxing, which is just going to be another way for E1 or S1, if you purely want to go for more cost, either E2 or E0, both without the signature, is going to be having the best value, using Herda S5 as well as Vonwek until E2 S1 is obtained. The reason why getting E1 is going to be a really good upgrade, is because you're going to be one step closer to unlocking an E2 with the 70 vibes and true damage 2-in-1 for the absurd amount of damage increase compared to if you go for E1S1, which is going to take you more costs. So the roadmap for Sobin is going to be E0S0, followed by E2S0, followed by E2S1, followed by E6S1. Now, moving on to Sobin's team comps, I'm just going to say this part is going to be taking quite a bit, but I'll condense everything as much as I can over here, and this is going to be a table for every single possible archetype that I would say is considered pretty decent in the big 2-6 with a certain amount of investment. I'm also just going to skip the endgame performance because they'll be discussed over here, and I don't want to yap too much because I feel that team comps for Sobin is by far the most important aspect for her value. So every single one of these teams, they are going to be done purely with a E0S0 Sobin. Now, this is clearly a ton of testing, and if we made this into a video covering every single team, it will be like a 2-hour thesis. So stay tuned for the live server, or maybe if this video gets 2,000 likes, I'll try to do it on the creator server. But to keep it brief, I'll be focusing on the top 3 most requested teams, which are going to be Remembrance, Nemiko, as well as Ashblade, and then briefly touch on the others a little bit more. Just before we get into it, the sustain slot for Sobin generally tends to be going with Hyacinth because she works very well with Ika's additional hits while also working with the OG Remembrance team, so this will be the ideal pick. That being said, she can actually function with both Huohuo and DHPT pretty well depending on the DPS, like for example, Nemiko running with Huohuo if you're going to be running Well Yang, or DHPT with Ashblade if you're going to be going for the S1 HP regeneration. For Finon sustains, I highly recommend sticking with a sustainless Finon, and hence Cyrene Sarija Sobin will be Finon's current bench slot team comp. For energy scaling DPS like Saber and Gilgamesh, Huohuo can definitely be used for more energy regeneration instead of DHPT. Now, moving on to the first team, and that is gonna be Mimo sprites for Casterus versus Cyrene. First of all, I think it's really cute that the giantess Cyrene is just staring down at Sobin. And Sobin is just gonna be dancing a song, so that's pretty much it. But the elephant in the room, since I'm sure a lot of y'all watching this video is wondering if Sobin is an upgrade over any of the Mimo sprite units, and the answer is, it depends. Generally, for any highly invested Mimo sprite players, I'm talking minimum 12 plus cost along with key Eidolons, like for example with E2 Casterus, E1 Evanite, E1 Hyacinth, and maybe even E2 Cyrene. For this particular high invested team, getting a E0S0 Sobin won't really change your performance by a significant margin, and I would just advise to keep on investing in the core Mimo members instead of expanding your team. Unless your Mimo sprite units can find another team to use with, like for example Tribi, Emblem, and RMC as an option without Hyacinth, I would not consider this path a spell specifically because Hyacinth is just really good with Sobin and Mimo sprite as a whole. However, if you're gonna be willing to commit minimum E2 Sobin, she is gonna be a definitive upgrade over either a low-cost Casterus or a low-cost Cyrene, purely from damage multipliers alone. If you're however thinking of just running a 1-cost E0S0 Sobin, you may consider getting her over either an E0 Casterus or an E0 Cyrene if you have at least E1 Evanite. But for these players, I would only advise you to go for this if you're willing to eventually commit for the E2 Sobin, which will then drastically increase the overall damage for the team, because one thing it remembers and what makes them so good is that every single one of these teammates have really good vertical item upgrades for both Casterus, Evanite, Cyrene, as well as Hyacinth itself. So if you're going to be removing one of the Mimo sprite units, but you're going to be running a 1-cost E0 Sobin, then you are not going to be getting the maximum benefit over time, so the final angle will be working yourself towards that E2 Sobin. So for this entire team, I'll be making a dedicated video going through every single cost comparison of Mimo sprites for her, so stay tuned in the future. Now moving on to the next team, and that is going to be Nemiko. And as a pro E2 Nemiko free-to-play by the way owner, I have quite a bit of thoughts on Nemiko here, so let me just ramble a little bit, but maybe this will help you build your team as well. So for this team, it has a lot of potential, and I'ma just say no. Sobin is not really gonna be an after-sale or dedicated support for Nemiko, just like a Sarija to a Finon or Dahlia to a Firefly. But for 1 cost, she's still gonna be one of, if not the best upgrade, assuming you are committed for Nemiko and getting her E2. Now, the reason why Sobin is so good and vastly outperform units like Sunday, even with E1S1 Sunday, or others like Spargo and Tribi or Well Yang, is due to defense down stacking in tandem with an almost 3000 attack buff, while the bursts provide more hits for units like either Emblem or Tribi as a 3rd slot when you're going to be running DHPT. You can also use Welt for decimation procs, and then you use Huohuo as an additional energy regeneration, just like the livestream team showcase, which performs really well for Nemiko even at E0. E4 Welt of course adds on another considerable damage upgrade if you guys do have that. Now, the reason why I personally feel Sobin is not made as a dedicated support for Nemiko is mainly due to our ultimate uptime and the issue of units we have for either Decimation or Verdict. So the burps can add as a nice hit count for Decimation, but in order to run Decimation, you have to run well for now, which may be uncomfortable for the debuff uptime or for E0S0 compared to Emblade's value with a sustain. If you, however, want to run Verdict Himiko, Emblade can then join your team with Sobin for excellent synergy, but DHP himself only covers Verdict unless you do a Sustainers with Relics on the same team. At E0, this is still okay, but as difficulty ramps up in the future, Sustainers runs will definitely need more cost investments, which eventually leads you back into an E2 Nemiko. A couple of other things that I've come to realize after playing Sobin with Nemiko is, for example, number one, a defense reduction overcap. So if you are going to be running Nemiko with Sobin as well as Yang provides a 40% defense reduction, and Nemiko's personal Lightcone is already going to be at 32%, so Sobin at maximum vibes at E0 for 40% will have about 12% defense reduction overcap at 50 vibes, and for the rest of the additional vibes at E2 for 70 vibes, that's going to be even more defense reduction overcap. That being said, however, for Nemiko, your vibe generation is actually a little bit tricky due to a lower number of additional hits with a current team, especially if you do not want to run Emblade. You realistically also waste quite a bit of damage since Sobin's ultimate gives extra turn to Nemiko immediately, meaning it is harder to use the other assist skill for your allies outside of a turn. If you do want to combine this for the highest amount of hits with Yang, then either Tribute or Emblade is really good to proc Decimation, but you will need to run this sustainless, so it is once again highly recommended to go for E2 Nemiko, making the playing experience a lot smoother. So as a result, this leads me to my personal opinion where Nemiko may or may not get another Astral Express member to fit into the current Decimation slot, which is either Yang or Hunt March 7, specifically with E2 Nemiko, and once that unit comes in, it could potentially drastically improve Nemiko's Decimation performance, and that is also where Sobin's role will still compete with Sparkle, E1 Tribly, as well as Emblade. It is not that Sobin's kit is bad, but the competition for this support slot is extremely contested should we ever get another Astral Express member that buffs Decimation. Because as of this moment, the only limited unit that realistically buffs Decimation is going to be Avenite, and she definitely does not go with a Nemiko team. Again, I highly recommend any Nemiko mains to at least get her E2, just like Finon, because it is still by far the biggest upgrade, and it makes playing with Sobin at E0 or E2 a lot smoother. Now moving on into Ashblade, which is ironically the best performing team at full E0, so for this entire showcase, I did not activate E2 Nemiko for the runs, nor E2 Casters and Cyrene. They have a very strong synergy via the number of hits, and Ashville perfectly making use of the additional turn and energy to increase its follow-up attack frequency, which in turn then buffs Blade as well as vibe stacking. I would still run Hyacinth here if you do not have S1 DHPT, and even if you do have S1 DHPT, high pressure scenarios like, for example, the Hemovore debuff with 500 fixed HP might still be too much. Now, I really like the way that this entire team plays, which reminds me a little bit of follow-up attack with Robin back in the days, but in an alternate version with defense down stacking that hits 100%, tons of buff multipliers, and very smooth gameplay. The only point I want to make here is if you do want to get Wave of Ventrine, then consider the opportunity cost between both E2 Wavent or E2 Sobin for vertical investment. The latter of E2 Sobin having the ability to pivot into other teams if needed. Now, the three main teams out of the way, here are some quick notes I have for every other team that I've tried so far. I will definitely test out with my units on the live server, or if y'all really want to see this video right now, like now, if this hits 2,000 likes, I'll see if I can squeeze in another one before the server expires. Generally, if you want to have an E2 Sobin for 3 costs, she can basically fit into every single team in the game, but that is going to be a 3 cost upgrade, so it will really depend if you want to commit that much. So every single top below is going to be purely based off of an E0S0 Sobin. So first of which being Saber as well Gilgamesh, out of all of the teams not mentioned previously, the most fun as well as performance enhancement I feel is actually gonna be this dual king team. And I genuinely mean this, Sobin feels more like a Saber and Gilgamesh after sales compared to Nemiko. He has very nice AoE defense down stacking, which is the biggest issue with Sunday and RMC previously buffing only a single unit. And while Emblade's buff multipliers were good, they couldn't help give Gilgamesh and thus Saber faster ultimate generation, and now Sobin fixes both of these issues at the same time. So even at a full E0 team, I was able to get myself a very pleasant 1 cycle in MOC12 with a Ho-Ho sustain, once again showing the power of team-wide energy battery, especially if you don't really face a lot of sustained pressures for Ho-Ho. For Saber mains with Gilgamesh, I highly recommend trying this even at E0S0, with E2 potentially being a god tier upgrade that could even push this team all the way up to tier 0. Then move on to Final. Just take note that for Final specifically, the vibes actually never gets reset. So once you hit 50 vibes, it is gonna be staying at 50 vibes for the entire fight, but it will take a while to stack because Final only hits a target once every single time. Still, highly recommend to get E2 Final first, as well as highly recommending E2 Cyrene here for the current best installed Final team of E2 Final, E2 Cyrene, E1 Savidra, and either a E0 or E2 Sobin. If you do not have yourself an E2 Cyrene, you can consider running another support like for example Sparkle and Sunday or even RMC, but one risk you're going to be facing is that if your Final exits the ultimate stage with Sobin, then you have to restart stacking the vibes all over again, and you might not have enough additional hits because Final's teammates generally do not hit the enemy target, so your vibes would be very low, and if you can't get enough stacks of Final, then the entire run kind of collapses. Keep in mind, if you want to get Sobin for Final, the E1 is effectively useless because the birds basically fly away in Final's domain. Also for Final specifically with Cyrene, you can run Sobin with 4 times HP main stat because you don't need the speed or energy regeneration, assuming she never leaves the state with your Cyrene upgrade. Now moving on to the Elation mains, you should still consider saving up your pools, even if some people are saying that Sobin is better than Sparksy. The key reason being the Elation team for now isn't complete without Pearl and most likely Nihilux, and the R-type promotes 4 Elation for 4 AHA skills, where Sobin is currently unable to make use of any AHA instance at all. So the cook currently is Sobin is a battery support for Yao Guang to spam Yao Guang's ultimate and AHA instance using Huo Huo as a team-wide energy battery with units like for example Evanesia and maybe even Silver Wolf, though Evanesia is more synergistic. Still, I will hold my pulse and see what Pro offers unless you want to chase a 0-cycle sustainers run with an E2 Sobin, and generally if you are going to be waiting for Elation upgrades, Pro is literally going to be coming up in the next banner update, so I would highly recommend Elation mains to just wait for Pro and see what they can provide. Now for break mains, only for sustainless E2 Firefly with at least E1 Dahlia and Field in play, then you can consider maybe an E2 Sobin for some silly damage increase as well as defense of stacking. Otherwise, most players playing break should still stick with either Lingsha, Gallagher, HMC or Ramei, because for just one cost E0S0, it is not going to be the most comfortable experience playing sustainless. And then for the DOT, it's also going to be like the same as Elation, wait for DOT units in the DOT team for more synergy, though in the short term, you could also run her as a sustainless unit, but generally not recommended. And then for the 3 different Amphoras DPS, that's going to be My Day, Anexa, as well as Aglea. They are around the same ballpark, which is they are very reliant on Cyrene, especially with an E2 Cyrene. So Reja is almost fixed with Anexa every single time, so unless you run sustainers, Sobin cannot replace anyone. For both My Day as well as Aglea, they might be a little bit more flexible, but it generally depends if you want to commit for at least E2 Sobin to have a significant damage upgrade. And then lastly, for both Facial as well as Acheron, they already have the current team with Ashblade plus DHPT, and Sobin's ultimate cannot buff neither Facial nor Acheron, so it will only be given to either Azure or Mblade, which is not going to be as significant, so you're better off using the original Ashblade team unless once again you get yourself the E2 Sobin. So that is pretty much all of the notes I have for current moment. If you have any other teams that you want me to try with Sobin, kindly leave them down in the descriptions and I'll try them either on the creator server or on the live server in the future. So in summary, Sobin is going to be a true generative support. For one cost E0S0, you can theoretically slot this into every single team in the game, granted you do not have a support slot competing with her. And that brings me to the point which is Sobin's pool value will heavily depend on number 1, the team you want to run her in, and number 2, the support that you currently own. Now, I would say as of this moment, she's currently best performing with E2 Nemeko as well as Ashblade, but Double King, which is going to be Saber, was extremely fun and I would say the biggest actual damage upgrade. For Mimo Sprites as well as Phynon, they are a pretty decent upgrade if you want to commit for more cost, and all other units are very flexible to see if you want to commit for the god that's going to be E2 Sobin.
I can smell her ass from anywhere.
Hey guys, Big P. So this is gonna be our endgame performance segment of our little guide videos. I feel like this might be a better way for me to do these segments going forward, where I'll just showcase how the team is gonna be playing for a couple of examples. So for Sobin specifically, we're gonna be doing a showcase for Ashville, Mblade, as well as Hyacinth to see how they're gonna be performing. And then maybe I might do one for Nemeko after this, depending on my mood. But without further ado, this is gonna be one of the examples that I'm gonna be running. So my face is gonna be covering. This is gonna be a Ashville with attack boots on crit as well as crit damage substats. The builds are definitely not gonna be the best, right? So we're just gonna be doing it with someone decent enough to kind of get us through. Mortag's Blade with speed boots on the classic 4-piece Master Smith with 2-piece Fonwag, Hyacinth on the good old-fashioned Hyacinth with 206 speed, as well as Sobin. Everybody's going to be a full E0S0, no items activated, and let's just see how this team is going to be doing for Sam, and then that is pretty much going to be it, right? So for entering into the combat, we are always going to be opening off with our other 3 techniques, and that's going to be Asheville, Sobin, Hyacinth, as well as Monarch's Blade right here. So taunting with Monarch's Blade. Now the reason why I actually place Blade in the middle is just in case Blade actually gets hit, we get a little bit more energy for Asheville as well as Hyacinth. Hyacinth might face a little bit of a energy problem because you are probably going to be using your basic attacks on Hyacinth just to generate a little bit more hits, and as such, more vibes for Sobin, right? More procs for Asheville as well as more energy for Blade, right? So we're always going to be summoning our little bird right here, taunting this guy, or rather just getting off our basic to get our ultimate immediately, as well as triggering an Asheville follow-up. Hyacinth is always going to be casting her skill here immediately, and then we're going to be summoning our little E-card. And then the moment this is 12, Sobin is just going to start singing for the rest of the battle, so you are just going to be facing this, you know, if you don't like the music, kind of reduce the sound. But I think this song is pretty catchy, so for now, I'm just going to be keeping it for our playthrough. So for Sobin's ultimate, you're basically going to be using her exactly like how you want to play, like for example, a Cyrene ultimate with an XR for 100% AV advance. For this particular fight, you want to get rid of the toughness boss, or rather toughness bar, for the Memory Zone meme, Shell of Fatal Rage, because this is the OG T-Rex that if you don't break both toughness bar, he is going to take almost absolutely 0 damage, so you definitely want to just get rid of this as soon as possible. So we're going to be going for our skill right here. I did not activate my action value advance for Sobin immediately because I want to let go of Asheville's ultimate one more time before giving him the AV advance right here, right? So Bird is going to come. He's going to be going for the follow-up attack. And we are just barely going to be getting enough energy for Azure right here, which is going to be a little bit unfortunate. You can see it's literally just 1 energy away, right? I've tried this out myself. So unless you get hit a little bit more times, you could grind for the RNG better. But for this particular instance, we're just not going to be doing that. So we're going to activate our Hyacinth's basic attack, immediately letting go of our Azure out right here. So we're going to pop this. And then at this point, usually you would want to activate Sobin's ultimate immediately, but I actually do not get another extra turn from Asheville because my speed is a little bit slow. You can see this is going to be 66 into 67 AV, so 100% AV advance on our, so you can take a look at our speed right here. There's a quick little speed math. So you can see my Asheville speed is going to be at 129 with the speed buff, so 10,000 AV divided by 129, that is actually going to be 77 AV. So if your number is going to be lesser than 77, you can see which is 60 or rather 54 right now, we're not going to be getting an extra turn. So you just want to save this a little bit more until Azure actually gets his turn up for the maximum value to get, you know, essentially 1 more turn for a little bit more energy as well as procs over here, right? So this bird's going to go in, right, and our vibe is going to reset a little bit. It's fine. Alright, we're just going to be holding on our Robin ultimate all the way to the very end. If I can actually kill this right here without casting Robin's ultimate, that's actually fantastic for us as well. Just see how much damage we're going to be able to deal with this, right? So he's going to hit, gets us a little bit more free energy. Bird is going to go in. So Azure is going to activate a skill. So obviously we can't kill from here. Then we activate Robin's ultimate, alright, giving us the 100% AV advance. Our ultimate will definitely kill here, so I'm just going to be squeezing out a little bit more damage so that I can bring forward my ultimate damage to the next wave against the original set, right? So now the dinosaur is definitely going to die. Alright, we get 1 hit, so the rest of them is going to be following up right here. Okay. And then we are just immediately going to pop all these right now. And you can see my vibe is going to be stacking on very, very nicely. Hyacinth is going to be facing a little bit of an energy problem. So right here, we definitely need to cast our skill. Otherwise, we're not going to be getting our ultimate. So immediately get skill. Pop open this out to summon another additional vibe generation for our little Ega, as well as the HP buff for both Sobin as well as Emblade. Speaking of the HP, we can take a look over here. My Azure's attack is absolutely massive at 8,359 because we do have a grand total of 3,259 attack buff, which is even more because we do have ourselves a HP buff from Hyacinth, so a very, very good amount of HP buff, or rather attack buff, because of Sobin's mechanics right here. So for this particular point, I actually want to hold on a little bit more. Then we activate this ultimate right here so that I get the maximum amount of damage at 50 vibes for essentially the maximum amount of defense reduction, right? So Sam over here is going to be at 65%. Everything else is just going to be as per usual. Hyacinth can just go for the basic for a little bit more procs, and Azure is going to be getting his ultimate right here. You can see how this team is just really, really synergistic with one another. Pretty much have almost no issue getting this to close to 100% uptime on 50 vibes. So this is just going to be dealing a lot of damage, and there is almost no issue in us getting this 0 cycle. And like I mentioned in my guide just now, I would say this team is probably one of, if not the strongest team that I have with Sorbin right now, combined with Mortimer's Blade as well as Ashfield, right? So now Blade is going to get this out, and then we're just going to pop this in, and we are already dealing so much damage to the point where Sam is almost going to be going for the buff if explode relatively soon. Right, we do get ourselves the additional energy from Sorbin, and then we're just gonna get ourselves Asheville one more hit, bring our Asheville back up right here, and then we're gonna cast an ultimate, and Sam is gonna be going down very nicely. I know my Blade ultimate ran up, but I just want to do a little bit more damage, so that is gonna be one of the showcases with Asheville, Blade, Hyacinth, as well as Sorbin. If you do not want to use Hyacinth, you can actually replicate this relatively easily, even with DHP team, for a little bit more of an attack buff for Asheville, or even Huo for a little bit more of the energy regeneration. So that is gonna be showcase number 1. So this is gonna be my second showcase, doing a sustainless setup instead with our E0S0 Himiko Nova alongside with our E4 Well. Alright, E4 Well with the tutorial, E0S1 Blade as well as a E0S1 Sorbin against Note 3 this time, which is gonna be the OG Destruction Sam. The build for this is gonna be a little bit more interesting. So for example, previously Nimiko had the option of running energy regeneration rope at E0. Well, because of Sorbin's additional energy regeneration, you are definitely gonna be able to run yourself the attack buff without facing too much of a downtime, and you can also run your fire damage boost sphere for Nimiko right now. Therefore, Well and Embley that's just going to be running of our energy regeneration, you could consider giving Blade HP for a little bit more B, and then Sorbin is going to be the exact same build as just now, running our 2-piece and Forest for the team-wide speed buff, which stacks on very nicely with her signature. Alright, now we're just going to be jumping into battle. We are always going to be activating Well as well as Sorbin's technique, then open up with Nimiko's to enter the combat, because we don't really care about the taunt value that much. Because we are going to be running this as a sustainless setup, we actually do an absolutely absurd amount of damage to the point where it is going to be a slight amount of overkill. So you do want to try and time your damage a little bit more sparingly. So for this particular instance, we are actually going to be going for the taunt on the middle guy, activate our Blade's ultimate to get a field, and then Well Yan can then activate his ultimate to get himself the 4-piece Eagle, as well as a little bit more energy generation for his Nimiko. So this is going to activate in our full ultimate. We are just going to scale one more time right here, and then Nimiko is going to be getting ourselves the ultimate right after Sorbin starts singing as 12 vibes. So all 3 birds are active, gets a damage vulnerability, gets a little bit of defense down, and like I mentioned, we are going to be quite overcapped on our defense down right here. It is extremely overcapped, so the entire defense down factor for Nimiko is actually not important whatsoever, because both Well as well as Blade already gave us 100% defense down. The more important thing is take a look over here. We do have ourselves 5.5k attack because of the additional buff we're going to be able to get from right here. Alright, so we do get this additional buff right here, which is going to be the Deviated Quartz. It's only at 1.6k right now because our vibes is very low. But the moment this reaches close to 50, you can see Nimiko's attack in combat is going to be absolutely insane. Right, so we're going to go for another assist skill. Blade is just going to be chilling because we are going to be dealing so much damage that they already died. So that is just really quick for our very first wave. Bird is going to be jumping in. I will let the Evil Sam summon our Nimiko first because this is going to be a free action value advance. Pulls us up right here. Then from this point, I'm just going to be adding our assist skill. I'll wait for Well Yang to enable his debuffs first so that we can deal more damage to the bugs. Alright, so from this point, we are just going to be using this because we are going to be getting extraction on Sorbin very soon. Goes for a basic into an ultimate. And then this is going to be giving us the maximum amount of debuff stacks. Instantly pops open our Nimiko out right here, which can also refresh upon activating our ultimate, so we get 2 more of the additional props from the refreshing from Well Yan skill, right? So this is gonna boom, absolutely insane amount of damage, 4.9 million into 5.6 million right here, killing all of the bugs with no issue whatsoever. And then the moment Nimiko lets go of our ultimate, you can see over here, 74 speed right here, we do get the maximum amount value from the AV advance from Sorbin. So we're gonna instantly pull bro back up. And this will then give me yet another very nice hit. And then Embley is just gonna be trying to deal as much damage as humanly possible. Alright, double hit right here. Goes for another ultimate, and you can see my vibe stacking for Nimiko is definitely not going to be really high, especially if you want to compare this with Ash Blade, which has a lot more instance of proc, but it's okay because the amount of damage we're doing is absolutely absurd. Anyways, Bird is going to be coming in, and then Blade is just going to be doing one more hit. Alright, just gonna go for the 9 out of 9. Nimiko comes in, and then with one last ultimate, we're gonna be easily getting ourselves yet another sustainless Zero Cycle featuring Sobin, Well Yang, Blade, as well as E0S0 Nimiko, right? So for this particular enemy, there is almost like zero pressure on sustain because Sam basically does no damage as long as you can get rid of the buffs as soon as possible. Just be a little bit more mindful for your action value. You can see we do have 35 AV remaining, and our bird do expire right here. So if you didn't have enough damage to kill for this particular ult, Well Yang can actually let go of a little bit more before the battle's over, but at this point in time, we do deal enough damage to get us the yet another Zero Cycle, right? So that is gonna be our endgame performance showcase. Let me know if you guys prefer this kind of like combat where I explain my moves just to showcase the endgame performance instead of doing like a little table featuring slot fiction as well as APOC shadows. So back to the final summary of this guide. So with that, I've pretty much come to the end of our relatively detailed Sobin team analysis as well as guide. Final thoughts over here. For one cause, I feel she's a very nice upgrade for any player looking to expand their support box or lacking one for the second and third team. E2 Sobin is absolutely insane, just like E1 back then, but way stronger. And I would say this E2 Sobin is technically better than E2 Blade. So for 3 costs, you can definitely consider going for this upgrade. Like I mentioned, this is going to be best in slot right now with Nimiko as well as Ashblade, but at E2, she is pretty much almost best in slot with every single team in the game. That is just how absolutely insane the amount of cost value is going to be from a raw damage multiplier perspective with true damage, defense down, attack buff, and everything in between. Keep in mind, she is not gonna be, in my opinion anyways, a Himeko Nova after sales to the same extent as Final is a redrop, because I feel there will be more coming out in the future for Nimeko if they want to give her another buff upgrade, maybe in version 5. Now, if you are gonna be too confused on whether or not you should get Sobin, I would just get one copy and see how she turns out over time, especially if you skipped Endblade previously. One very important thing to note is that version 5 is going to be coming kind of soon, so I don't always want to pull for generated supports because there will always be better generated supports coming out in every single version, as you have seen from version 1, version 2, as well as version 3. At the end of the day, Sobin is still a really fun unit, and she's extremely good for Zero Cycles because action value is always going to be action value, and ultimate manipulation with energy regeneration is just one of the most important gimmick, which is why Sunday was used for a while until eventually he couldn't do it anymore because his buff multipliers were simply not there on top of just buffing a single character. So I definitely cannot wait to test Sobin even more on the live server, and for this testings, I'll just leave it over here. I'm going to be making more videos for Sobin Zero Cycles as well as Sobin cost analysis to see what it's going to be. Also, I think my editor might have used a couple of spoiler bosses for Normie Arbitration King, so we're definitely going to be talking about that as well. With that, we've pretty much come to the end of Sobin's entire guide and everything you need to know. Let me know what you guys think of her in the comments below. Word of the day is going to be burp. Join Twitch, join Discord, use code POKE of gamer subs. All the best for Gacha Pools. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.